Now, what was always so bizarre about that 28-point plan that the media called a wish list on the part of the Kremlin was that for all the reasons I just said, for things that weren't in there, but also for things that were, it was, I would say, not just uncertain, but maybe even likely that the Russians wouldn't have accepted that as a peace deal. Remember, the Russians have been fighting a very brutal war for 4 years. They've invested a lot. They've paid a big price in terms of life and in terms of resources to secure what they perceive as their security interests. And they believe they're winning the war because they are. And they're not going to give this war up unless they get the things that they feel they need. Who would? Why would they? That's been why it's been so difficult to end this war. But at least that peace plan was a strong step toward finding a way to get the Russians to agree to a peace deal. But what happened instead was Marco Rubio, who has always been a neocon and a warmonger despite efforts to try and mold himself into the Trump administration, decided that he was going to get involved and flew to Ukraine to involve himself, to insinuate himself into a peace deal that fortunately he had been left out of. And he announced in Ukraine, oh, we made great progress, meaning not we and the Russians, but we and the Ukrainians. We got a deal that the Ukrainians are going to agree to. And the only way that happened was because Marco Rubio created a peace deal with Zelensky that the Russians in a zillion years would and could never accept. In other words, Marco Rubio is there trying to sabotage the policy on which Trump ran of ending the war between Russia and Ukraine, because Marco Rubio doesn't want that war to end, because Marco Rubio, despite all the rhetorical flourishes designed to ingratiate himself with Trump, is in fact the same neocon and warmonger that he always was, part of the GOP establishment. Here's how the New York Times framed it. Of course, the New York Times is on the side of Rubio. The New York Times is on the side of Ukraine, wanting this war to continue. New York Times, November 24th, 2025, how Marco Rubio tried to bring a pro-Russia peace plan to a middle ground. So you have Trump and J.D. Vance and Steve Witkoff defending and praising the plan that they negotiated with the Russians. It's the Russians you have to negotiate with. They're the ones who are winning. And then Marco Rubio flies to Ukraine and, in the words of the New York Times, transforms a pro-Russian peace plan into a middle ground. All right, let us take a moment to examine something happening quietly, but with enormous implications. While the public is told everything is stable, those closest to the financial system are not behaving as if that is true. Major institutions are not waiting for clarity. They are already repositioning. Goldman Sachs has warned of a 10 to 20% market downturn. Morgan Stanley has abandoned the traditional 60-40 model and now recommends allocating about 20% to gold and silver. These decisions reflect a sober understanding that years of easy money, expanding debt, and political complacency carry real consequences. Earlier this year, gold broke above $4,300. That was not driven by retail investors. It was driven by institutions preparing for instability, often quietly without broadcasting their caution to the public, which raises a simple question. If large financial players are protecting themselves, why should everyday savers be the only ones left fully exposed? Golden Crest Metals created a straightforward guide that explains this shift and outlines the 3 steps to add gold and silver to an IRA, 401k, or TSP tax and penalty free. They also provide a complimentary portfolio review. The CEO personally speaks with every new client, and for qualified accounts, they provide free shipping, free secure storage, or a free home safe for those who prefer physical metals at home, along with up to $25,000 in free silver. You can request a guide by calling 888-614-7120 or visiting goldencrestmetals.com. Once again, the number is 888-614-7120. goldencrestmetals.com. In moments when the insiders move first, informed action is not alarmist, it is prudent. This is what they said, quote, last week, President Trump set a hard deadline for Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky to agree to the details of a 28-point draft peace plan with Russia. If he refused, Mr. Trump said the Ukrainian leader would be left to, quote, fight his little heart out. By Monday, that deadline, Thanksgiving, was gone. The 28-point plan, which was widely criticized as a series of one-sided concessions to Putin, then has shrunk to closer to 20 points. The price of the changes made during a series of meetings over 11 hours in Geneva, led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, is clear. Mr. Putin, some Trump administration officials predict, is likely to dismiss the new draft out of hand. By any measure, the administration's rollout of the new plan was maladroit at best. Mr. Rubio downplayed the proposal last Wednesday as a, quote, list of potential ideas, while Mr. Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Carolyn Leavitt, the White House press secretary, embraced it. Shouldn't Trump, J.D. Vance, Steve Witkoff outweigh what Marco Rubio wants? It's Trump who's the elected president. Trump was out there touting this plan as an important step of progress, and then Rubio somehow goes and undermines it all and does a deal with the Ukrainians that has zero chance of ending the war, which is what Trump says his policy goal is. The New York Times goes on, the specifics outrage the Europeans who have been kept in the dark, even though they are funding Ukraine's arms and designing a security guarantee for the country. Republican leaders were equally blistering about the leaked proposals, including Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the former majority leader, who said in a statement that, quote, Putin has spent the entire year trying to play President Trump for a fool. In Kiev, the Secretary of the U.S. Army, Daniel Driscoll, a friend of Mr. Vance's, presented the proposal to skeptical Ukrainian officials. By Saturday, Mr. Rubio was in damage control. He headed to Geneva to meet with Ukrainian and European officials. So essentially now we went from having a deal that could very much have finally ended this war to Marco Rubio somehow insinuating himself into all of this and single-handedly sabotaging it by removing all of the parts of the deal that would have made it at least preliminarily attractive to Russia, and maybe not gone as far as the insane Europeans went, but still became a lot closer to the European model of pretending that Ukraine is winning this war and that Russia is suing for peace and that Russia has to simply sign whatever deal the West puts in front of them because Zelensky has the Kremlin surrounded. It is insanity of the highest order. This war makes no sense from the perspective of American interest. Zero sense from the perspective of American interest. When you add on to the fact that even the pretext that we had that Ukraine is a democracy is gone, given that Zelensky has shut down every conceivable democratic attribute, including elections and free speech and a free press, and the proof, not that anyone needed it, but the proof that there's now massive embezzlement taking place in Kiev, where the money that we're sending to the Ukrainians is simply being siphoned off by corrupt officials very close to Zelensky for their own personal wealth. This is one of the most senseless, obscene wars we've seen in a long time, and we've seen a lot of senseless, obscene wars. But as J.D. Vance said, nothing animates the bipartisan DC class. He really talked about the Republican establishment more than ensuring that wars continue without end. And Marco Rubio and a lot of other people inside the U.S. government are doing everything possible to sabotage what Trump said he wanted, what the plan that Trump endorsed and ratified and publicly defended, in order to ensure not that Ukraine gets a better deal when this war ends, but that this war never actually ends, because too many people are benefiting from this war. In fact, pretty much the entire elite class is benefiting. The people who aren't benefiting are the Ukrainians, the Russians, and the American people who continue to pay for a war that has absolutely nothing to do with them. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.